For generations, people have traveled to California to follow their dreams. And today's guest, Sarah Landstrom, is no exception. She's an inspirational artist who found herself inspired to paint trout the first time she pulled one out of the water. A natural-born teacher, Sarah has a passion to introduce women to fly fishing and claims that fly fishing is the yoga of fishing. I've never done yoga, but I think I'll agree. Welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. Thank you for joining us today, Sarah. We really appreciate you being on our podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the offer.
Yeah. I spoke with Jim Gephardt. I was actually from On the Fly Mag, and he told me I should reach out to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Now, before we push record, you said you were in the middle of moving.
Yeah. So I just moved to San Francisco. I am starting an MFA program here. Being an artist, I also would like to be able to teach. So I need a master's degree to do that. And it's been great so far, especially connecting with the local fishing community. I just got a job at Lost Coast Outfitters, and they've been great with connecting me to some local fishermen, especially saltwater fishing, which I've never done before. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, great! Now you're from my area. You're from the Michigan area. Is that correct?
I'm from Muskegon, Michigan. I grew up there. So
oh, great.
Yeah.
So where did you fish at up here in Michigan?
So I would say I most frequently fished the White River because it was so close. But I fished the Muskegon quite a bit, the Pere Marquette, the Manistee, and made it up to the Asable River a couple times as well.
Oh, well, that's great. We've had a couple of artists. Yeah. We've had a couple artists here on our podcast. We've had A.D. Maddox. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and then we had Bob White, who was our second podcast. Bob White in his episode Reflections on Light, and so we love having artists on. So we're very excited. Now, when you say art, what kind of art do you do, Sarah?
So I am a painter, and I do very large scale acrylic paintings. Usually it has to do with aquatic life, but I also do landscape and figurative work as well.
Okay. What is it about the aquatic life when you say that? Are you talking about fish or?
Yeah. So fish, water scenes. I really was very taken the first time I went fishing. At the time I was in Montana living there, and I was with a friend, and she kind of taught me some basics of fly fishing. And the first time I saw a trout out of water, I was so shocked by the colors and the fact that, this thing swimming beneath like a pretty monochromatic surface could be so beautiful and so vibrant. So I ended up starting to paint them, and yeah, I've been doing that quite a bit ever since.
Well, that's great. Yeah, they're beautiful fish, and looking at all the detail, and if you look up really close, it's pretty wild to see. So when you're out there, are you into photography at all, or are you mainly just into painting?
I do, I would never say I'm a photographer, but I try and do a bit of that. But it's primarily painting, and I do all catch and release, so it is really important to have the photography component there because you want to be able to get the fish back in the water as soon as possible. But yeah, so usually it's studio work, sometimes when I'm doing landscape work, so I work outside.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, tell us a little bit about what got you into fly fishing. How did you end up doing that?
Yeah, so it was one of those things where I really just stumbled upon it. I was living in Helena, Montana at the time, and I was hiking along the Missouri River down from Hauser Dam, if anybody's familiar with that, and ran into my friend Kathleen, who was learning to fish at the time, and she was just like, oh, hey, you should just try it out. And I was familiar with spin fishing and deep lake fishing being from Muskegon, but I actually had never done fly fishing. And to me, that was just a totally different ball game, and it was
Wow.
so much more fun and active.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of where it started. And being in Montana, there was tons of opportunity, and I've been able to fly fish in places like Iceland and back in Michigan and on the East Coast, and now here in San Francisco. So it's been kind of this fun um, hobby or like component to my artistic practice that I've been able to take with me wherever I go.
Well, that's great. So when you could fish, if you could fish anywhere, where are you most comfortable? Are you home? Are you most comfortable in Michigan or in Iceland? Where's your, what would you consider like the water where you go and you know it really well and you're just comfortable there?
Actually, funny enough, I mean, I'm sure it's just because I learned there, but I'm most comfortable in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
So when I moved back to Michigan, I was very unfamiliar with river fishing for the most part in that area. So I kind of had to learn and work with some local friends, and kind of get in touch with Michigan's rivers because it just wasn't something that I did growing up.
Mm. Yeah.
But yeah, so probably like I'd probably say like the Missouri River is the one that I fish the most and I feel most comfortable fishing in.
Well, that's great. That's great. So is trout the main species you go after, Sarah, or?
It is. I've done quite a bit of salmon fishing as well. I have some friends who guide up in Alaska, so I've been able to head up there, and that's just, I mean, it was a wild experience, especially the first time.
Yeah.
I'd never felt anything like that. But yeah, so it's been nice because I've sort of been able to have a, or slowly like add on species wherever I go. Like when I was in Iceland, I was able to catch char and things like that, which was pretty fun. And then grayling as well back in Montana.
Mm.
But yeah, trout are definitely the most frequent fish that I catch.
Oh, that's great. So, what are some of the things that draw you to fly fishing? And what do you think it is? I mean, you said you were spin fishing and you do all this other kinds of fishing, and I know you said it's just
hmm
because it's active, but what keeps you coming back to the river, Sarah?
Well, I think it's because I mean, whether people like it or not, I mean, sometimes it can be aggravating, but you really have to be in touch with what's going on at that time.
Mm.
So it creates this different dynamic between you and the water you're working with. You know, it's less forceful. It's more like you're working alongside the water to have that experience. And you're also, I mean, catch and release fishing too, I think felt better for me. Um, just because I don't like the relationship of having to, you know, like bludger a fish and stuff like that. But yeah, and on top of it, like I've made some of the most incredible friendships I've ever had through fishing and
Mm.
fishermen who are so generous, not only with information, but just like people who you've never met before will give you flies when you're new to a river or, you know, tell you what's working. And that's not always the case wherever you go, even just like with other types of fishing.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Sarah. It's an interesting camaraderie you have with people who fly fish. It's a strong bond, and I don't know what it is because I grew up on the in South Texas on the Gulf of Mexico. You know, spin fishing
Okay.
for like redfish, you know, speckled trout and all that on spinning gear. And you know, when you're when you're putting your boat in and you know doing all that stuff, I mean, it's not like you're chums with everyone at the boat dock, but
Uh huh.
with the fly guys, it's like, you know, like you said, I mean, sharing flies is a very common thing. Hey, try this, and somebody you've never even met before, but they're so into it and they're so
Yeah.
excited. It's just like it's just awesome camaraderie, and that's what I love about fly fishing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's pretty incredible.
yeah, tell me a little bit more, a little bit about your relationship with water while you're in there. I mean, emotionally, does it get you centered, or have you tried yoga or anything compared
Oh, yeah.
to fly
Well,
fishing?
Yeah, well, they say that yoga or fly fishing is like the yoga of fishing. But it's for me, it's best when I'm absolutely alone, kind of out there with my own rhythm. Especially if I'm looking for a therapeutic setting where I just need to kind of get away for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even just like the feeling of the water and exploring areas and finding wildflowers along the banks, especially in Michigan, everything's so lush.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing wildlife and kind of feeling like you're actually a part of that. You're not trying to impose on it, but you're actually just there to witness and appreciate it. Which I think has played in a ton to my art practice and the way I view what I'm painting, because I've had many people try and push me to make more dramatic works where it has to do more with like death or like death of fish and more like the harsher aspects of their life cycle. But I don't think that that's what people should focus on. I mean, that's true in any person's life, no matter if you're a fish or whatever. But it's one of those things that's so precious that I think it deserves recognition. Um, and it's hard to explain the feeling of being there and being a part of that and having those kind of still moments. Um, Also contrasted by like the excitement of catching fish. But I think fly fishing is one of those things too where, I mean, if you have the right attitude going in, you can get just as much out of it, like not catching fish, as you would on a great day where you're catching a bunch. So
Yeah, and that's interesting that you pointed out the contrast of this peaceful moment, and then you hook a fish and it's just such a rush.
mhm.
Like I've never thought
Yeah.
about that. Tell me a little bit more about that contrast. I mean, I don't know what else you could say about it, I guess, but that's interesting that you point that out, because I've never really put those two together. Because and it's interesting your perspective too, Sarah, about liking to fish alone, because some people prefer to share the experience with others. So
Mhm.
that's everyone's different. I like to fish. I like to fish with other people just because very few of my friends fly fish. So I want to get everyone on the water. So because I'm so excited about fly
Yeah.
fishing, it's like, everybody, come on, this is a great time.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, definitely.
so can you tell us a little bit about like something, maybe a hardship or something that you went through that fly fishing really helped you through that moment or that time period in your life?
Yeah, well, so especially like having gone back to Michigan after being away at school, um, I was in Ireland at the time it had happened, but the man who like first took me fishing was my grandfather, and he very suddenly passed away for circumstances that I won't go into. But when he passed, it was just this kind of like heartache of wishing that I had done more with him and gone fishing more with him, because I had been so busy at the time that it was just more casual visits and less these, bonds we'd created through the things that we like to do. So I remember going kind of alone, and it was sort of this sort of like self-reflective time after being around family and like having all of these people kind of crowd you about what just happened, which in a sense is good. Like sometimes you need that kind of time to buffer before you let things like that set in. And I remember going to the river alone and just having these like waves of emotion kind of wash over me while fishing, and thinking about how happy he would be just to know that I was still doing that. Or considering how we had shared these experiences and how I still like yearn to be able to fish with my grandpa. Um, But just yeah, I guess like I don't want to get like overly emotional about it, but
Right.
it's one of those things where you can really process things and use it as like a meditative experience when you need that. And then you can also have times where you're out with your friends and it's kind of rowdy the entire time.
Yeah.
Um, but it can definitely cater to many different things that you might need as a person.
Mm. Well, we just recently had Dave McCoy. He's out of Seattle. He was just here on an interview, and he talked
Mhm.
about the responsibility of the person who first introduces you to fly fishing. Um, because there's two different types of people. A lot of people are just all results oriented, catch as many fish as you can kind of deal. And then there's
Mhm.
some people that are more process oriented that, hey, we just really appreciate everything from washing the drift boat down to the the whole process, the rhythm of it all,
Yeah.
and he talked a lot about the responsibility of the person that first introduces you to fly fishing, because that's generally how you'll see fly fishing your
Yeah.
entire fly fishing career.
The person I first learned from, my friend Kathleen, the way she introduced it to me was um, kind of funny because she was still in the learning process,
Mm,
but she just kind of would tell me basics of like, oh, like make sure you wet your hands before you touch the fish because like you're preparing to send it back out and you don't want that slime layer to be damaged.
mm,
Um, and things like, oh, there are certain areas where it's almost best to go barbless and kind of more of these ideas that I then looked into on my own.
mhm,
Um, but it is interesting, place to place and person to person, how they handle it. Because even in talking to friends back in Michigan who, might have had like one or two experiences with fly fishing out west, and they thought it was kind of this purist sport. In the sense that like you would go barbless, like you might not even take the fish out of the water, um, things like that. But it definitely varies, but it also shows kind of like the the ideal of how you should be catching these fish because it should be kind of a respectful relationship because you're getting so much enjoyment from them and you don't I mean some people keep and to each their own, like everybody's got a different situation that they're dealing with that might be a staple to their lifestyle, but it's it is interesting hearing person to person how it's affected them in the long term because I don't think people backtrack much.
mm.
Like once they learn something like that, especially when it comes to the morality of the practice, it's hard to step back. Even you know, myself when I went up to Alaska, I was so shocked by the experience of the salmon that we ate. So it wasn't like they were going to waste, but the idea of killing all of these salmon
Mm.
was so disturbing to me and seeing that side of it and realizing that I could never do that consistently. But I think it was because I had initially learned in an experience where it was catch and release.
Right. Yeah, you say, people don't normally go back or digress, once they start once they start doing something.
Yeah,
That's probably
yeah,
why my cast sucks so bad is because I learned off when
yeah.
I can't fix it. But yeah, I know exactly
Oh,
what you mean.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's important, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but when you talk about your grandpa, that's really cool. And, unfortunately, understanding that what you've learned about how, hey, time is short and we need to make all that we can. Some people don't learn that
Mhm.
until way later in life. So kudos to you for learning that lesson. And, unfortunately, we've all probably, listening, have lost somebody that we've had to process that. And, yeah, so it just kind of reminds me to call my dad tell
Oh
them that I
yeah,
love them, you
definitely.
know? So
Yeah.
is your family still here in Michigan then, or?
Yeah, so everybody lives there in Muskegon. And yeah, I actually made a point to make sure that they had everything that they needed and knew at least enough to keep going with fly fishing before I left. Like I set them up with like boxes of different flies that would be better for different seasons because they're so new to it that they're still learning a lot of those things.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it was one of those things where I was like, I feel awful if I just left and hadn't tried to at least share this with them, whether they like it or not, because it's been so important to me and been so helpful in my life that I feel like it's at least worth a try, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and were they pretty receptive when you left them with all that stuff and information?
Yeah, I think my little sister, who is actually starting at Hope College, she was definitely the most interested in getting into the sport because I think she knows a fair amount of people at the school that are interested in fly fishing. So I think that could be a really great friend group for her to make, whether it's in, her normal crowd of friends or not. That those friendships are very different from day to day friendships. So I hope
Mhm.
she sticks with it.
Yeah, and what's your sister's name?
Hannah?
All right, Hannah, stay at it. So keep fishing, Hannah. You know, she's listening to the
Yeah.
podcast, you know. That's great.
Yeah, I'll
Well,
make sure she hears it.
that's awesome. So in San Francisco, is it almost like a whole new world to you? Are you having to relearn, since you're fishing in the salt? Are you having to relearn everything that are you having to learn like a whole new way of fishing? Can you just kind of tell us about your experience so far there?
Yeah, so I mean saltwater is completely new to me and I'll definitely be learning in that sense. But when I was driving here, I went through Lake Tahoe and the Stanislaus Wilderness area.
Mm.
Um, and one of the neatest experiences was I'd already fished the Truckee River earlier that day, and it was just a really tough, like, hot day, clear, low water, and we were fishing in the middle of the day, and that was really, a tough experience. But later that evening, after kind of being disheartened by a rough day, like the first day I'd fished in California was a rough day, and we stopped at this restaurant for dinner, and I looked out the back window, and I was like, that river looks so trouty. And so I ended up asking one of the waiters, I was like, hey, do you know if people fish in there often? And he was like, oh yeah, that's why most people come to this area. And so I looked it up and it turned out to be this great trout river. So I ate everything really, really fast and went and grabbed my stuff out of the truck and I ran into this guy in the parking lot who saw me pull out a fly box and he was like, oh, you're going down to fish? Like, you need to use this, this, and this. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. And so I went down there and ended up, I only fished for like a half an hour, but I caught 4 different rainbow trout,
Oh my
which was
gosh.
just so much fun to, like, I was so excited that I ended up bruising my legs falling into the river running out there. So it was one of those experiences. But yeah, so in a way, like it's been familiar and friendly in some senses, but also challenging in others, which you can't really ask for more than that. I mean, you wouldn't want it to all be the same. So yeah, I'm really excited to get involved with fishing in the area. So,
Well, that's great. And what are you studying there in San Francisco?
so I'm going to the California College of the Arts for a master's in fine arts,
Okay.
and with that, I'll have the opportunity to teach basically at any grade level, including college. So yeah, should open up some nice doors. And I'm really looking forward to the program. All of the faculty is awesome there, at least the ones that I've met so far.
Oh, that's great. That's very, very exciting. Anything else that you'd like to share with us, Sarah? Any? any other stories? Could you tell us a story about something that's happened to you fishing? Or I mean, obviously the restaurant story was a great story, but any stories come to mind? Any craziness or?
Um, let's see. I would definitely say something that's really important to me in my experience is especially when it comes to teaching women to fish,
Hmm.
just be so encouraging because I think a lot of people view it kind of as a men's sport. You know, traditionally that was something that men did, not women.
Hmm.
But some of the cooler experiences I've had are teaching like girlfriends of mine how to fish and seeing how excited they get and realizing like, oh, I can go out and do this on my own. And in a way it's really empowering. Um
Yeah.
to not have to depend on other people at all, really, to
Hmm.
go and do that. You know, obviously you want to be safe, like know your area, especially if you're going out alone. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's one of the funnier experiences I had teaching was I had this friend Veronica, and I took her to the Little Blackfoot River in Montana, and she had never been fishing in Montana, and she's actually from California herself. She's, I, I believe, from Dublin, which is really close to here. But she'd never been fly fishing or anything, and I was kind of just teaching her some basics, and I kept having to untangle her line. And at one point, she was like, "Oh, Sarah, I think I'm stuck again." And I was like, "Okay." So I start like wading back out there, and all of a sudden, I see this flash, and I'm like, "No, Veronica, you have a fish on the line. You're not stuck." And she started like freaking out, and suddenly like realizing I don't know what to do. And the most hysterical part of that, though, was it was a whitefish, but
Oh
I've
wow.
never seen someone so excited about catching like a sucker fish. And she like sent her parents pictures and stuff. It was great.
Aw.
But yeah, stuff like that makes it all worthwhile, though, especially the sharing component of fly fishing. So, but like I said, I really encourage people to make sure that you know your daughters go, your friends go, because it's it's always good to see other ladies on the river, you know.
And it's just
Mhm.
really cool. It's really cool to see that. So that's really cool that you're involved. There's quite a few groups. I think there's a big female group here in Grand Rapids, a group of gals. I can't remember they're called the Fly Girls, and they go out
Okay.
and they go out fishing on a regular basis, and it's just really cool to see that, and that's really neat that you enjoy that. Where do you see that? I mean, do you see that changing as
Oh,
society
absolutely.
yeah, tell me a little bit more about what you see in the future of that.
So what one experience that was really, really cool for me because I mean, learning in Montana, there were more women who, or at least from my perspective, it seemed like there were more women who were getting involved with fly fishing than I generally see in Michigan.
Mhm.
It's still picking up, but it's taking more time to gain momentum. But one of the experiences I've had this last winter was at the fly show in Denver, Colorado, and I was there as an artist. But getting to meet these women who, were quite a bit older than me, but had really fought to gain respect in this kind of culture of men, essentially.
Mm.
And like you said, like there are some fantastic female anglers. And it was just kind of one of those things where you had to change people's perception of what fly fishing was and who could be doing it.
Mhm.
But yeah, hearing their testimonies as teaching women and kind of having to, in a sense, prove themselves, which isn't ideal, but sometimes to start with the initiation of change, you kind of have to do that. You have to prove people wrong. And hearing that and understanding that, whatever like weirdo I run across who thinks that women shouldn't be fishing. They had something totally different that they had to deal with, and kind of made it possible for women my age to become involved, and to not only become involved, but have these groups of women who want to go fishing together, or, even the companies who will have women's wear. The fact that you can find women's waders and wading boots in basically any fly fishing store says a lot, because that wasn't the case for a really long time.
Wow.
So yeah, that was really impactful, meeting those women.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't even think about that, about female waders and wading boots. That's cool that I have that awareness that, that wasn't always the case. I can't imagine my wife clomping around in a big pair of
Yeah,
men's
yeah.
waders,
Yeah.
That would be...
Well, I remember my first waders I just bought at like a Bob Ford out in Montana, and the wading boots that I bought, the smallest men's size I could find was like a 9, and I'm normally like a size 6 men's. So I was just like dragging around these boots everywhere I went. But it definitely does make a difference, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And so you see the future of women in fishing. You think we'll see that demographic continue to expand as more people
Oh yeah,
experience that?
absolutely. And I think, like even the more like male dominant companies, not dominant in the sense that they're against women in fly fishing, but more just like there are more men in that market. We're so excited to have women involved in this kind of industry, and seeing how this sport is changing and evolving, and having women be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is like often, with like a fresh set of eyes, like a different perspective. And coming from that stance of like, that you're probably going to be the only woman on the river, it gives you, a totally different perspective from just like another guy. So that's been cool to see how that's impacted other aspects of fly fishing, especially at those sports shows.
Yeah, yeah. I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, I really appreciate you taking some time with me today, Sarah. It was just a pleasure meeting you and talking with you. And
yeah, you as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let's just keep in touch. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Sarah. Bye-bye. Well, thank you, Sarah. And thank you for joining us today on the Remote No Pressure podcast. You can check out her website at sarahlandstrom.com. We have the link in the show notes and on our website at remotenopressure.com. We're on a mission here at remotenopressure.com, and our mission is to introduce as many people as possible to the joy and healing powers of fly fishing. I invite you to join us on the journey. Go to our website, sign up for our mailing list, check us out on Facebook and on Instagram. And until next time, go fishing.